lately I've been doing a lot of videos about the placebo effect, about water experiments, about quantum physics, and the double slit experiment. So there's still some topics that relate to all of that information, and I haven't talked about them yet. So I was mentioning how the universe is a multiverse. Like, we have multiple universes, and quantum physics and science has a belief system now. There has to be multiple universes. I discussed in a previous video why science believes that, briefly to explain it over again for those who haven't seen that video yet. So in the double slit experiment, it basically proved that particles exist simultaneously in every possibility. So because an individual particle can exist simultaneously in many places, that means that an atom, and atoms are what everything is made of, atoms to a certain degree would have that ability as well to exist in multiple places at once. That's the quick explanation for why scientists now believe that if there is one planet Earth, then there has to be a whole bunch of Earths existing. Just how one particle can exist in many places, they also believe, because of that, that the Earth has to also exist in multiple places. There's an ancient belief and saying that as above, so below. So that means if in the quantum world, if one thing is true and exists, then that truth has to carry up to the larger world. That's why atoms look like solar systems, why solar systems look like galaxies, and why ultimately our entire universe that we're living in probably looks like a big galaxy. I shared a picture earlier of a radiation scan. I believe it was a radiation scan that NASA or someone had done on our universe, and it basically looked like the universe was mapped out identically to our brains. So when they take mapping of our brains and the firing of the neurons, and they take a picture of that, the mapping of our brain is identical to the mapping of the universe. That once again follows the as above, so below. So because as above, so below is so prevalent in our entire existence, that's why if particles exist simultaneously everywhere, then our world has to exist simultaneously everywhere. If you'd like more information about that topic or topics like it, you can watch probably the last 5 videos that I posted before this one. They all talk about different aspects of that same thing. So today what I'd like to talk about is reincarnation. So the reason I want to talk about reincarnation is because most spiritual belief systems don't believe in reincarnation. Some belief systems do believe in reincarnation, but some don't. So the reason that I think that reincarnation has to exist is because if quantum physics is correct about there being multiple universes, which means multiple Earths in multiple frequencies of reality, then what would be the point of having all of those universes if you never actually potentially experienced the universe? In spirituality and in some religions, people believe that our body is made up of a soul and of atoms, but the whole point of religions for the most part is the belief that we have some sort of an afterlife, that our soul carries on past this life and that we have an afterlife. Our soul is basically just a group of energy, and that group of energy exists in our body while we're alive, and that group of energy leaves our body when we die. So when you're going through your life, you have millions of choices throughout your life that you could make. At any given time, you have at least 2 choices to make. Sometimes you have way more choices to make in any specific time in this reality. So because you have so many choices you could make, science is telling us that for every choice that you could have made but you didn't make, there has to be a separate reality where you did make that choice. So that opens up the door to billions of planets, basically, that are almost identical matches to the Earth that we're living on right now. So there's a show that I used to watch back in the 90s. I really liked the show. Like, I used to watch X-Files like most people did that were my age. But one show that I used to really like watching that most people didn't watch or had never heard of was the TV series Sliders. So what made TV series Sliders so interesting is there was basically a boy. He created a device so that he could basically slip between universes. So he in essence became a universal traveler, where he would use this remote that he made and it would take him to a new universe, and every episode was a completely new universe. And some of the universes were so close to his actual universe that he came from, but there would just be like slight differences. Like in one episode, the Golden Gate Bridge was blue instead of red, and there was other times when he thought he was home because he had been traveling for years and he wanted to stay on the planet, but he would go open up the gate to his house and it wouldn't squeak. So then he just assumed that that wasn't the reality he was supposed to be in, because he remembers the gate squeaking before he left. So the show ended up running into a bunch of characters outside of him. He met people that he also took time traveling, and it shows all the possibilities. Like, there's tons of possibilities where he ran into himself, where he was doing the exact same thing that he's doing now, or he was developing what he is now using. There was also episodes where he had a completely different life, a life that he felt that he couldn't even have. To experience all those lives and all those multiple realities, you either have to have a soul that can split off into all those choices so that you could live every single choice at some point in time, or you basically get reincarnated into the same life and into different lives, and you go through the lives making different choices until all the choices have been made. And I don't know if any of you have read those adventure books that they used to make a long time ago, but I used to have some adventure books that I used to read, and those adventure books, they only have so many choices. Like, their choices are very limited, but sometimes you would finish going through the story and you would finish reading the book and you would go back and you would reread the book and intentionally make different choices just so you could read more of the book, so you could see where the book ended up leading to that time. And sometimes you would, even though you made different choices, you'd end up in the same spot of the book, and sometimes the book ending would be completely different and you would have completely different experiences. Well, I think our lives in this universe is the same idea. Like, I think that every single choice you could have made, you eventually end up living in a different existence anyways. And I think that if your soul is energy, then that means your soul can literally break itself up into almost as many parts as it actually wants to break itself up into, because one little atom of energy out of an energy being that might be, 100 billion energy particles. I mean, you can split yourself off into 100 billion pieces if that's the case. That's just talking about atoms. What if you can split yourself off as a energy being into each particle and not atom? Well, how many particles are in every single atom? It's almost infinitesimally large, the amount of pieces that you could probably split yourself into if you are an energy being. So being an energy being means that you're probably experiencing all of those possibilities at the same time. So right now, this part of me is experiencing this life and I'm having all these different experiences, but I could have split off from the energy part of me 10 years ago that made a different choice. once during one of the choices, and that energy being would have went off into a completely different life than what I'm experiencing right now. Now, my higher soul, in essence, would be experiencing both or all the individual options, but I don't have access to every single individual option because I'm caught and stuck in this one tiny little reality out of the bazillions of realities that could exist for this particular life. And I think that that makes a lot of sense, and I think that that is the way that it is, because if there was multiple universes and you're not actually gonna go through and experience those lives ever, then what's the point of having a multiverse, right? Why do we have such a diverse existence where particles can exist in multiple places at once, but like, let's say higher things like the world couldn't? You know, that's my problem with a lot of religions, is a lot of religions believe that you come here, you live one life, you get one chance to get it right, and if you don't get it right that one try, then you're done. And I mean, there's so many people that say they have memories from past lives. They come here with knowing, like, I mean, when you think about an RPG game where you're going through as a character and you're making different choices and the game is different every single time you play it. So even if it was limited like the adventure books that you can read, you would still be able to have a whole bunch of different outcomes. But I don't think our lives are that limited. I think our lives are way more diverse than the books or the RPG games. So to me, it doesn't make any sense why you would have all that possibility and not take advantage of that possibility. So that's why I think that you pretty much have to have reincarnation, not only in multiple lives, but you need to have reincarnation in the same life multiple times to get the diverse experiences that you could have from that particular life or any other lives that your soul might end up in. So I personally believe that reincarnation has to exist based on what science is finding right now, based on what we are currently learning about the world around us thanks to science. Spiritual gurus have talked about how linear time and the way that we experience it isn't actually true. They say that all time is existing simultaneously. So you can think about it this way. If you're an infinite being, let's say you're called God or the universe or whatever you want to call it, but you created this universe and all the universes that could possibly exist. And you created it so that you could have multiple experiences of whatever happens in those universes. You're not going to create a life and only experience that life once. You're going to create a life and experience all the possibilities of that life at every single instance, in every single possibility, and you are going to do that multiple times throughout many, many lives. That's why spiritual gurus have basically told us that we are living in a school. They have the belief system that Earth is a school, and the reason you have multiple lives, the reason your soul leaves your body and goes into another body, is because our souls are constantly progressing through life, and we're learning as we go. So then every other life that we live, we make different choices because we're a more advanced being than what you currently are. And since time is not linear, that means you could have a future life in the past, or you could have a past life in the future. And that means that since you have all these souls in essence that are you, a part of you, but living all these lives, different lives at the same time, and they don't have any connection usually to each other, and the only connection there is your ultimate higher soul that is able to oversee all of it at any given time, but you're like locked in your one tiny little world while you're in that world until you die, and then you rejoin your higher self. What makes you think that you're not just a brain floating in a jar? Why do you think you have eyes and you have ears? Maybe it's just all signals being given to you by a computer. So maybe you're a brain sitting in a jar with electrodes hooked up to you, and maybe it's just firing information into your brain that your brain is perceiving as ultimate reality. So that idea kind of leads into the idea of thinking that we could be possibly living in a matrix. So I mean, if you have multi-dimensions and multi-dimensional space, the ultimate computer system, like, I mean, the computer systems we have right now, they keep expanding and getting better. But if God made the universe, how advanced do you think that maybe his computer system might be? His computer system might be so advanced that we would think we're living in reality, but technically maybe we're not living in reality. This is why people like Elon Musk believe that there is a better chance we are living in a computer matrix than there is that we're living in base reality. So they're saying that the likelihood of us getting such advanced computers and getting to the point where reality is so realistic that you can't tell the difference between the computer program and between real life. So if that's true, then that means there is more options for you living in an advanced society where they literally, you know, got God's computer and implemented it, and now they just live in computers. And I mean, if that happened, then that society would advance to the point where they made God's computer, and it just basically keeps layering itself over and over and over until you have like base 1 million reality where they have now just reached completion of making God's computer, just like all the realities below them. That's why people like Elon Musk believe that there's probably a better chance that we're living in a simulated matrix universe rather than living in base reality. For me, that's just an interesting thought experiment. I don't necessarily put a bunch of credence into it, but at the same time, with there being multiple universes overlaid over top of everything and reincarnation happening, it almost seems to me like we are literally playing the most advanced RPG game that has ever existed. And the whole reason that you make an RPG game is for entertainment. Well, if you're an all-knowing, all-spiritual, all-everything being, and you're just floating around out in nothingness, I mean, what are you going to do to keep yourself entertained, right? Like, there's nothing for you to do. Like, if you're floating around in nothingness, you have no life. Like, there's no experience. You would eventually get bored as an all-knowing, all-omnipotent being. If you've ever watched Star Trek, there's a race of people called the Q. Now, they're not even as omnipotent as what we would think that God can be, but they were still more omnipotent than human beings were at that point in time in the show. And he was literally like a god to us. Like, the things that he was able to do seemed godlike to the Star Trek characters. And he was so bored, even though he had other omnipotent beings around him that he could talk with. That's why he decided to come and mess around with their crew. If you're an omnipotent being, you are eventually going to get so bored of your beingness that you are going to want to do something else. Like, this is literally the ultimate RPG game, and this seems to me like something that a god would create to keep himself entertained and to keep himself from being bored in the vast nothingness of the universe. Because in the show Star Trek, Q got so bored of dealing with all the other Q members, he got so bored of messing around with other races, he got so bored of visiting and exploring all the universes and all the galaxies within all the universes, that he finally got to the point where he started messing around with the Star Trek crew, and he was so advanced to them that he seemed like a god, even though he was not godlike. Like, what I imaged God to be would have been way more powerful than what Q was, but he had a lot more powers than what a basic human being has. Another topic that relates to this is the Mandela Effect. So I talked in a previous video about how we're in essence multi-dimensional travelers, and we travel from dimension to dimension depending on the choices that we have made. So I had talked about if you were living on the first page of your reality and you wanted to travel through all the choices and get to the last page of reality, like that's a far distance, going from a 1% likelihood all the way through to the 99% likelihood, and then out to the 1% likelihood again on the other side of the bell curve. So I was talking about how you can make that trip if you choose to, but by the time you make that trip, your life might have been so long already that you might have already died before you reach the other end of that bell curve. So with that being said, every single page and every side of every page was a different universe. You would only have so many universes that were identical to your universe, just like in the show Sliders, and eventually you would get to a place where there was just small changes. Some changes you wouldn't even notice, some small changes would be larger changes that you would notice, and then the further you got through the book, the further you get away and the more changes that there are. So people believe that the Mandela Effect is true because they believe that we are jumping realities and jumping universes more quickly now than what we have been in the past. So they basically believe that there's a condensing of all the realities, and then so when you have a condensing of all the realities, I mean, there's like how many of me out there? Well, when the realities start collapsing on themselves, the experiences start intertwining with each other. So I mean, it's almost kind of like my souls would start collecting into each other as the pages collapsed, right? So some souls might go back up to source, but some souls might just join my soul and we experience that particular life that we collapsed in on together. So some people are thinking that this could be a matrix that we're living in because there is multiple dimensions. The Mandela effects that we are noticing now are happening more frequently because, like I said, it's almost like the universes are collapsing on itself, kind of as if there's one key moment that all the universes are heading to, and the universes, like most of them, have no choice but to go to that one key moment, right? So as they're all diverging and converging on that one particular moment, you can't have as many of them as what there was, so they have to slowly collapse on themselves so you can get down to the one point in time where those dimensions are collapsing down to. So I think that's probably why there's so many things that have been changing since 2012, because literally 2012 was the end of the Mayan calendar and they started a new age in the Mayan calendar that's the age of spiritual awareness, right? It's supposed to be the age of higher learning and the age of love and peace, basically.